If we are to see significant transformation in our communities, all the indicators are that it must begin with a strong focus on early childhood. In 2018, the G20 Gathering of Nations was convened in Argentina. One of its key outcomes was a broad initiative for early childhood development that determined to contribute to ensuring that all children grow up in nurturing and enabling environments, protected from all kinds of violence, abuse, neglect, and conflict. Signatories committed to providing a multi-sector and coordinated approach to investing in early childhood, including quality parenting, providing secure, safe environments, and home, centre, or community-based prevention activities for children at risk of vulnerability. Because each locality has different demographics and resources, a community development approach is needed to bring about significant change. In Australia, one of the key drivers of this approach in recent years has been the Communities for Children initiative, beginning in 2005. In the city of Salisbury, a number of community partners were contracted to work with local family support stakeholders to develop and implement strategic plans to improve outcomes for children at risk. After an extensive community consultation and using a co-design approach, the Salisbury site developed a number of family support centres in different contexts to deliver integrated wraparound services and peer support for families at risk of abuse and neglect. It also facilitated a whole of school approach to developing a culture of wellbeing in schools. The initiative resulted in significant improvement in child outcomes, as measured by the Australian Early Development Census, substantiated notifications data, academic achievement, bullying behaviour, and school attendance. The Salisbury Communities for Children site is located in the northern suburbs of Adelaide. The Salvation Army Ingle Farm was the facilitating partner, which organised the initiative in the area. In 2005, it began with 5 suburbs. Later, that was expanded in 2009 to 7 suburbs, and again in 2015 to 12 suburbs in the Salisbury city. In 2006, the suburb of Ingle Farm had the highest proportion of children developmentally vulnerable in one or more domains. Ingle Farm also had the highest proportion of developmentally vulnerable children on the social competence domain, as measured by the Australian Early Development Census in 2006 and 2009. You can see there the 2006 proportion of children vulnerable in one or more domains, as measured by the Australian Early Development Census. That shows the 5 suburbs in Salisbury we started in, and Ingle Farm had the highest number of children developmentally vulnerable in one or more domains, Paraka to a lesser degree, Para Hills to a lesser degree, and Salisbury East to a lesser degree. So this is how we started. We started at Ingle Farm Salvation Army with a playgroup, supported playgroup, which had attached to it a number of other activities for parents, including one program called Mainly Music, which attracted a lot of people, and it was about music and movement and involved children in music and movement activities. And that was done 3 days a week. And then we discovered a huge area, which was about the equivalent size of 10 classrooms, and we began establishing supported playgroups and a whole lot of other initiatives there. And then later on, we went to Salisbury Primary School, where we found a large double-sized classroom area and began to initiate activities there. That later went on to form the basis of a number of hubs that were started in the Salisbury area and the Elizabeth area. Some of the key activities located at the family hub at Ingle Farm and in these other places were a range of playgroups, perinatal support groups, parents at risk of postnatal depression, parent groups, soft entry activities such as cooking and sewing, culturally appropriate support services for called communities, home visiting outreach, training in early childhood and family support, and co-located non-government organisation and government services, so that families could access different services that they needed and find the different services they needed and different supports they needed in the same place, basically built around a community. It was really recreating an urban village in a city urban area. Here's a picture taken in 2010 at an end of year celebration, and you can see the diversity of the families there and the initial attraction that people had to the whole concept of a family hub. That particular night, I remember it was about hovering around 40 degrees. It was pretty warm and we didn't have proper air conditioning. So families were very keen to come and engage and celebrate, and it was, for them, it was a real lifeline. It was a real place where they could find the kind of support that they needed. Now, when we started the initiative, we knew we needed to evaluate how effective it was. So we took baseline data of services that were available to families at the start of the initiative in 2005. And then again, we took the same data in 2008 as part of the 2004 to 2009 National Evaluation of Communities for Children. The baseline data documented that 18 new services were introduced into the Ingle Farm area during this period based on Family Zone Ingle Farm and the Salvation Army at Ingle Farm. 4 additional services were implemented more broadly across the state during that period, including Ingle Farm. So here you can see comparison Australian Early Development Census data for Ingle Farm between 2009 and 2015. If you look at vulnerability in one or more domains, you can see there was a 10.4% improvement in Ingle Farm between 2009 and 2012, and a 5.8% improvement between 2009 and 2012. Between 2009 and 2015, it was an 11.7% improvement, and in 2 or more domains, a 6.1% improvement. So it was significant in the Ingle Farm area where we concentrated most of the family support services, because we saw that that was the most important area, because it was the highest area of need. In terms of substantiated notifications, here we see Ingle Farm and Walkley Heights data, and you can see that between 2011 and 2015, you can see a gradual decrease in the number of substantiated notifications that were reported in those areas. Here are some NAPLAN results for Ingle Farm and other schools. This was later on when the students that were supported in the early years went on. And you can see that in the Maroon graph, similar schools, it was fairly flatlined, but in Ingle Farm, you could see the improvement happening in terms of NAPLAN scores achieved by students in the school during those years. Overall, in the 5 suburbs that we were working with initially, you can see in yellow the significant reduction in percentage of children vulnerable between 2009 and 2012. So it wasn't as marked as in Ingle Farm, but it was a significant reduction in 1 or more domains in Salisbury C4C sites in terms of comparing them with other sites of similar suburbs. In most of the domains, you can see there. So it was about a 5% improvement overall. And there you can see the substantiated notifications data for those 5 suburbs. And 5 suburbs includes Para Hills West, as well as Para Hills. So you can see that overall, again, there was a reduction in substantiated notifications over all of the suburbs that we were working in during those particular years. We can't overestimate how important it is to protect children and to care for children, particularly in the early years. The well-known German theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer once said, "The ultimate test of a moral society is the kind of world that it leaves to its children." In Matthew 18, Jesus also pointed out the incredible importance of caring for children. He described children as the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And he said, "If anyone causes one of these little ones who believe in him to stumble, it would be better for them to have a large millstone or a large weight hung around their neck and be drowned in the depths of the sea. So he took very seriously the ramifications of harming little children, and he put a great emphasis on protecting them. He also said, "See that you do not despise one of these little ones, for I tell you that their angels in heaven will see the face of my Father in heaven." So he prescribed guardian angels to them. And he was really focused on the fact that it was really important to him. In fact, he said, "In the same way your Father in heaven is not willing that any of these little ones should perish." He was stressing the importance of going out of your way to care for little children, and he really stressed the importance of the consequences of not caring for little children. So that is one of the foundational values that we see he taught, and is key to anything we do in terms of wanting to improve our communities and see them transformed. Communities, municipalities, and nations that are looking solely to secular and local and national governments for community transformation are bound to end up disappointed. Jesus and the early apostles respected the role of secular government and encouraged early believers to pray for it and to be tax-paying cooperative citizens. But the concept of ecclesia, from which we get the word church, also incorporated believers living out the core values the Master taught across all the spheres of influence in their communities. Today, that includes families, faith communities, government, education, social services, media, the arts, sports, and entertainment, as well as others. But they are some of the key areas in which we need to be involved. There's another dimension besides the physical, emotional, social, and cognitive domains measured by the Australian Early Development Census that needs to be included if we are to see sustainable transformation in our communities. In some other countries, they actually include this dimension. Children and their families need to develop spiritually if they are to negotiate the challenges and anxieties of life in their search for meaning, identity, and purpose. Despite an improved understanding of the impact of trauma on early childhood through neuroscience and other disciplines, child protection notifications and substantiations on the whole continue to increase. Meanwhile, the foundational values that once supported healthy child development continue to be eroded in the culture of many developed nations. Something of the impact of what we're seeing happening at present can be seen in this graph, derived from the Australian Bureau of Statistics data. You can see the percentage increase in child protection notifications between 2016 and 2021, and at the same time, percentage decrease in Christian affiliation between 2016 and 2021. So it's pretty stark. Sure, there are many compounding factors, but it does illustrate the kind of issue that we're dealing with. Clearly, we're moving away from the social fabric that once produced healthy outcomes for children and families. Much of the impetus behind the social disintegration we're seeing in our communities today can be traced back to the 1848 Manifesto of Marx and Engels. They formulated all history as the history of class struggles and created an oppressor narrative that leads to a victim mentality, disrupts social cohesion, and foments violent revolution. We're seeing the outcome of this worldview still being played out in Ukraine today. It's also morphed with Islamic jihad in Gaza and Lebanon, and is being championed in the streets and universities worldwide under the guise of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Though some truth can be found in the colonialism narrative, where there have been atrocities, certainly, critical theory is largely being transposed onto the very movement that established the foundations of Western civilization. We have labelled missionaries as colonisers and are systematically going about destroying the social fabric created by this movement that has supported thriving families for centuries. All in the interest of promoting the aspirations of the current regimes in Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, etc., and other totalitarian regimes seeking world domination. So this is a critical issue for our time. The core values of Western communities came into being from a movement initiated on a cross in Israel 2,000 years ago. The barbarism of child neglect, abuse, and grooming of children into hatred of other ethnic groups and warmongering was challenged by a prophet and teacher who sacrificed his life in order that we might be empowered to change. His Easter resurrection and the outpouring of his Spirit resulted in arguably the greatest change movement the world has ever seen. Beginning in Jerusalem, the transformational message he announced rapidly spread across the Middle East and Europe and established the core beliefs and values of Western democracy. Supportive communities for children and families formed in the wake of its emergence that resulted in far better outcomes than previously was the case. Historian Tom Holland has documented this well in his excellent 2019 book, Dominion, The Making of the Western Mind. Here we can see an illustration of the spread of Christianity in the purple by the time of Irenaeus, and in green by the time of Constantine. So you can see it rapidly spread across the Middle East and Europe during those years and formed the foundations of the Western civilization that we know today. Christianity has produced some notable failures, such as the medieval crusades provoked by the destruction of sacred sites in Jerusalem, and the more recent sexual abuse by some of its clergy. But in the main, the benefits of Christianity have far outweighed the failures. No other movement has ever gone near to replicating the kind of community transformation initiated by the one who sacrificed his life in order that we might have life. And it all happened without the violent savagery we see repeatedly emerge from the neo-Marxist view of the world. The transformational message of the cross lies at the heart of civilization as we know it, despite being hounded out of the public space in recent times, and intense persecution and continued attempts to cancel out its followers. In Australia in the 1970s, when missionaries began to hand over leadership to local pastors and evangelists, revival broke out as Indigenous people began to use the gifts of preaching, teaching, healing, songwriting, and singing. On Elcho Island, off the coast of Arnhem Land, in the Northern Territory, some locals had been praying for 3 years when, in 1979, God's Spirit began to move. Many experienced healing as people began to pray, sing songs of praise and worship, and spread the message of the cross. In the power of the Spirit, they went south through the Northern Territory and into Western Australia and South Australia. Such was the impact that the Warburton Ranges, once the worst place in Australia, had now become a happy place. Many locals were set free from fear and the scourge of alcohol. Such was the impact that it was reported by Reverend Dr. Dejini Nini Gondara that a nursing sister had told him that during 1 week, no one went to the local hospital. Here you can see a 20-metre high cross right in the centre of Australia that was erected by some supporters who were working with local Aboriginal people who really wanted this as part of their newfound ability to be able to initiate projects within their community. And you can imagine some of the struggles they went through for a number of years to actually get this up and running, but they did it because they saw the cross as central to being able to change their way and their life and the lives of their families and children. And it stands there as the forgiveness cross, forgiveness being the message that is so critical if families and children are to thrive and work together with their local communities. And it's an amazing symbol of what can bring about real change and real community transformation. The sad reality is that the changing narrative of recent years has eroded many of the foundations that were established in these communities back in previous generations. And we are seeing more tragedy unfold each day, even 235 kilometres to the east of that cross in Alice Springs and in other communities throughout Australia and the world. The best approach to dealing with the scourge of intergenerational trauma is to prevent it from happening in the first place. Mothers, fathers, husbands and wives need to be empowered in their roles in nurturing babies, raising children, and training them to be able to repeat the process for the next generation. As lives are turned around towards loving God and one another, we see pivotal changes in families, communities, and nations. Community transformation happens most powerfully when we are empowered by the sacrificial love of God to take care of the disadvantaged and vulnerable and live out the transformational message brought to us by the Prince of Peace. You can find out more about this in the books, Building Stronger Communities with Children and Families, and Changing Hearts, Changing Communities, which are available in ebook and paperback formats. You can find them at amazon.com.au or other digital stores.